Everyone, good morning. It is Friday, our favorite day of the week. We are so excited to see this group grow. We now have around 1350 members. So welcome to all the new members. So excited to have you here. Hopefully you learn a thing or two and spread the word. Since we have so many new members, Deepika and I would like to quickly introduce ourselves. So my name is Henna. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Basis, where we're looking to make personal finance more accessible and inclusive for women. And
my name is Deepika. So I handle investments and advisory at Basis, and we're hoping to create a much more inclusive environment for women to learn and invest.
And so as part of that, we run this community, we run our literally the favorite time of our week is to run these Finance Friday chats. So welcome again. Today what we're going to talk about are short-term goals. Now I know there was some chatter about it on the group during the course of the last few days. So a short-term goal is essentially a financial goal you may want to achieve within the next 12 months. Just by definition, that's considered short-term. So it could be something in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and things that fall under this category are goals such as travel, which we saw was super popular as a financial goal for our group, an emergency fund, which we're going to go through today, or anything else you may want to achieve. We saw folks talking about buying that Kindle or that laptop, whatever it may be, a goal you want to achieve within the next few months that you may have to start planning for. And so today we're going to talk about those goals and how to get to them using a very interesting tool called liquid funds.
Great. So happy to talk about it. First of all, thank you to everyone who tuned in. Last week we got some overwhelming response to the conversation we had, and look forward to have more such ones for you. About today's topic, very special to me because I love talking about it because not too many people are aware of this probable investment in mutual funds. By default, we're prone to think that all mutual funds are risky, and even the mutual fund advertisement says, subject to market risk, read the offer document carefully, etc. But there is an extremely interesting and extremely low risk instrument that you can use to help you meet these short-term goals. So what these are called liquid funds, and it's quite self-explanatory by the name itself. It's called a liquid fund, which means that at the time you might need your money, you can withdraw it at a fairly short notice, and it's available in your bank account, if not on the same day, probably the next day morning. And I'll tell you how liquid funds work. So liquid funds primarily invest in government securities. They invest in treasury bills. I know these terms might seem complicated, but what these terms actually mean is liquid funds invest in highly secure instruments which mature in about 91 days. So which works for all of us, which means it's not investing in an instrument that's locked in for a long time by default, meaning we are locked into that fund. So interestingly, liquid funds have no cost of investing in them. They have no cost of withdrawing from them. So there is no exit penalty, which you would otherwise have on your recurring deposit or fixed deposit even. I know several people who just leave their idle money in their savings bank account because they're worried that, hey, I might invest in this FD, and what if I need to withdraw it earlier? There's a penalty that I might have to pay for it.
So just to interject there, so liquid funds are better than an FD for those two reasons. One is potentially better returns, which we're going to get into, and the second one is no kind of penalty for
at the time of withdrawal.
Right.
And interestingly, liquid funds probably are a much more suitable replacement for your savings bank account and your recurring deposits. So as we all know, our savings bank accounts give us between 4 to 6% interest. Of course, there are a handful of banks which give you a 6% interest on your bank account, and they have several clauses there. You need to invest more than 1 lakh, and only then can you get the 6%, etc. And I'm sure some of us are tuned into the recent changes in the FDs and the recurring deposit returns. And I was just looking at some RD returns this morning, and a 3-month RD is at about 5.25% interest. And it's extremely important to note that this interest on your RD or your savings bank account or your FD is taxable, which means if you're doing that 5% RD, after tax, you're not really earning very much on that investment, which then leaves us with, hey, so where do I invest? Because clearly recurring deposit isn't working for me. My savings bank account isn't really giving me a great percent of interest. So what do? Firstly, just to reiterate, liquid funds much better than your savings bank account or your RDs. As you might see, the returns in these are fairly low, and post-tax they even come lower. What you can do when it comes to liquid funds, there are funds where you can get started with as low as $100 a month, or probably, I have 5,000 rupees to invest. Let me give it a shot. Let me see how it works. And you can get started with as low as that, maybe make a withdrawal, see how soon it comes into your bank account. And once you get comfortable with using these instruments, you can invest further.
So question for you, Deepika, how do you identify a liquid fund?
So every mutual fund or every AMC, as they're called, asset management companies, has a separate category of funds called liquid funds. In terms of comparing one liquid fund to another, if I were to talk about an Aditya Birla liquid fund and compare it to an ICICI liquid fund, there isn't much of a difference in their interest rates, because primarily they are investing in the same quality of instruments, and this is mandated by SEBI, who is like the governing body deciding all these rules. So they're mandated to invest in a certain quality of instruments only. And I'm probably just going to give you the example of Aditya Birla liquid fund. It's something that even Basis provides for you to invest in. So liquid funds are used by several people, and not only by people, by even companies. So for instance, the Aditya Birla liquid fund has a corpus of about 61,000 crores, which is a fairly huge amount. They're managing money of investors to that extent. And I actually had a look at their portfolio. It's fairly accessible. Even on the Basis app, you can just plug in and look at where they are investing. So they invest in a combination of treasury bills. They invest in, for instance, Canara Bank's FD. They're invested in HDFC Bank's FD. They're invested in IndusInd Bank's FD, which means that what you get at a fixed 6%, they are investing in a combination of instruments which gives you that slightly higher return. So at current levels, returns on liquid funds are between 6.7 to about 7.2%. And I think that works very well for people like us who want to invest small amounts. We know for sure we need it within 12 months or 14 months even. It's a great tool to get started and build that fund.
And before we go into the next topic, I would assume knowing all these details, like a regular investor doesn't need to worry about, like what the fund is investing into, and that's just if you're curious. And
yeah, I mean, if you're curious, which to some extent you might be, but don't get into details to the extent that you want to become the expert, because that's your undoing. Trust the experts. For instance, like I said, at Basis or probably any other tool you might use, they compare funds across the horizon and choose the best ones for you, which is why even here we provide you about 5 liquid funds. We don't want to overcomplicate this investment situation, which is already overwhelming for several people. It's quite simple.
Okay, so typically an AMC has one liquid fund that
they have more than one.
Okay,
but you, typically an expert or an advisor will give you the options of which might be most suitable for you.
Got it. Okay, so I think what we'll do next is go back into kind of the application of this, right? the goals that we started off this chat with.
Yeah.
Like, what do we use these liquid funds for? Well, to achieve our financial goals. We know that setting up an emergency fund was a very, very popular ask in this group, and it's great. I think as women, we're always, contingency planning and thinking long term and stuff like that. So it's great that we're thinking about creating that contingency fund for that rainy day. But what we'll do now is walk through how we create that fund, right? So typically what we advise as a rule of thumb is for an emergency fund, set out at least 3 months worth of your necessary expenses. So these are your need to have expenses, not necessarily your nice to have. So let's say on a monthly basis, you're spending 20K, right?
Yeah.
20,000 rupees on your must-haves, your necessary expenses. So what we advise is start creating, so have that corpus, that fund of about 60K rupees. And to add that extra cushion or buffer, take it up to 6 months of worth of expenses. So over 6 months, we're talking building this corpus of 1.2 lakhs. Right, so this is our financial goal. I need to have 1.2 lakhs for the purposes of an emergency. Now, the duration that we always talk about, remember, a goal has 3 parts: amount, duration, and purpose. The duration of this is obviously dependent on when you want this emergency corpus to be in place by. And it depends on, let's say you had an emergency corpus, it got depleted for whatever reason, you faced that emergency, you had to tap into it. You may want to create a new one over the next several months, right? So an emergency fund is an example of a short-term goal, and we're going to walk through how to use a liquid fund to achieve that goal.
Yeah, and I think it's important by default when we say emergency, we probably think of worst case scenarios when it comes to health or other such things. But it's quite interesting things we've been coming across of late. An emergency could even be your laptop breaking down. It costs a ton of money to buy a new one. You have a vehicle breakdown which you didn't expect. You have any other kind of emergency travel that comes up that you need to fund suddenly. So we wouldn't say emergency always has to be the worst case.
Yeah, like a job loss or something like that. That is drastic, or a medical emergency. But yeah, I think let's walk through an example.
Yeah, so we're not going to actually walk through an example of the emergency fund. We're going to walk through the example of something which everyone's been asking us about, and probably the maximum comments we've got on a travel fund. So what typically happens when it comes to travel, and it happens to most of us, including us till we knew better, is that, you know what, I have this travel happening in the next 2 months. I use my credit card, book some tickets, then like scramble and figure out how am I going to fund the rest of the expenditure attached to that trip. But I think this can be planned a little prudently and in a very systematic manner. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I don't think we're trying to create this perfect scenario of, okay, I'll get this started, everything's going to work out for me. 80% of it will work out. There always, especially with travel, there are like discretionary expenses that come up, but the effect will be much lower. It's also important to note, and I know a lot of us have this aspiration that, you know, I want to take this trip, like including Henna and me, and something we've shared on the group frequently, that we have this travel plan next year June or next year September. But I know for a fact that if that trip costs me 2 lakhs today, it's not going to cost me the same amount next year. It could possibly mean tickets have gone up. It could possibly mean, you know, other expenditures, hotels, etc. have gotten more expensive. It could possibly mean there's been some drop in currency value, which then has an effect on how I need to plan. So what we do at a basis is that we consider that rise in price, or otherwise what's called inflation. So, okay, what cost me 2 lakhs today? If I'm taking that trip 12 months later, what is it going to cost me then? And hey, let me plan for that backwards now. So what we've actually done here is we've taken an example of a travel goal. This goal which costs me 2 lakh rupees now, we've considered it at a 10% inflation because yes, travel gets expensive by 10% and upwards actually. So something that cost me 2 lakhs now, 12 months later is at about 2,20,000, which brings us to the next question that, okay, if I need to get to that 2,20,000, how much do I need to invest?
I think you'll have to move this
Yes.
a little closer
So-
because it's out of the frame. I'll help you.
No, I think we
Okay,
can.
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you need to invest in a liquid fund, and we've actually given you a recommendation of which one. You can invest in the Aditya Birla Sun Life Liquid Fund, which currently is at about 7% interest. And all you need to do is get started on that SIP or systematic investment of 18,000 every month. Next thought might be, hey, 18,000 is a bit difficult. Start with whatever you can. Don't postpone that investment thinking, I'm going to wait for that perfect day when I have 18,000 to invest every month. Start with whatever you can and build that over time.
Cool. Okay. So let's. I think should we just go to questions we had?
Yes.
Or do we want to? I guess the first thing I'll ask is, how is this? I know we briefly touched on it, but liquid fund versus like, why would I ever pick an RD or an FD over a liquid fund?
Typically, I shouldn't.
Okay.
It really doesn't work in my favor. But for those who are falling in, say, the lower income tax bracket, if you're earning up to 5 lakhs or say 7 lakhs even, based on your taxation, it might make sense for you to invest in in your RDs or FDs versus liquid funds. Also, in several cases, people are not so comfortable investing in this mutual fund universe. So if you have that 1 lakh to invest, I would suggest do a 50,000 in that recurring deposit or in that FD and do the balance 50,000 in a liquid fund or any other short-term mutual fund, which will give you your money as soon as you need it. So if you're not comfortable, don't take the plunge completely. Bear in mind the effect of taxation and do invest some amount so that you get used to the whole concept of liquid funds and how they work.
Cool. So I think that's a good segue into, I think it was Shweta's question, right? On the tax implications of liquid funds.
Yes. So I think it's important to note liquid funds, again reiterating, work as a beautiful replacement to your savings bank account and to your recurring deposits. I'm not going to overcomplicate the number bit here, but basically all you have to do is to know, hey, how much do I actually earn on my savings bank account or on my RD? Say that 5.25% interest that you earn on your RD, it's taxed as per your tax bracket. So if you're earning between 5 to 10 lakhs, it's taxed at 20%. If you're earning about 10 lakhs, it's taxed at 30%. So do that math and get that post-tax number. When it comes to liquid funds, they are taxed exactly the same way as your savings bank account or your recurring deposit. And what happens here is that because the interest rate is higher already, the post-tax return is much more effective. So what you're getting at 5.25% on your RD, you're getting at 7% on a liquid fund. So you've already made 1.8% above that interest rate by default. So post-tax is also going to be a higher amount. So keep that in mind. The taxation on liquid funds post 3 years works slightly differently, so I'm not going to get into that bit. We'll probably take it at a much more evolved level of our conversation when we get there. Shweta also asked us that she's confused about various type of short-term funds and if we could provide some clarity on those. So yes, like we said, liquid funds is one category of them. There are several others. In the mutual fund universe, there are several other short-term funds which are called ultra short-term funds, overnight funds, floating rate funds, income funds, corporate debt funds. But all these depend on is how long you want to stay invested for. The entire decision of you investing in these is dependent on, hey, I have X amount, I want to do it for 3 years, I want to do it for 3 months, or I want to do it for 5 years. then you choose a fund accordingly. And we'll probably do a write-up on that separately because it's too much to cover in this discussion. But Shweta, I hope you understood the fact that choosing a fund is dependent on what duration you want to stay invested for.
Cool. I know we're running a little over our time of 15 minutes, but I think we'll answer one more question. We'll answer Sarita's question on how do we keep funds for monthly rent and regular savings plus household expenses? Can we generate multiple sources and manage all? I think the answer is absolutely yes. You can generate it from multiple sources. These all kind of just map out to different goals. Right, so we've always talked about keeping a set percentage of your monthly income as savings. Do that within the first week of you getting that salary, right? So let's say we're putting aside 20% of our monthly income. With the balance 80%, you end up, budgeting for your different expenses. It's rent, it's whatever you're spending for your home and for yourself, etc. And with the rest of it, with the savings you have, start putting it towards different goals that you may create. A goal may be an emergency fund that you want to set up within the next 6 months. It could be a travel plan that we just went over, going to destination X next June or next September, and start putting money towards that. Now, if you're wondering where you can do all this, we've actually built all of this out, keeping in mind a lot of these questions people may have, or hesitation, or how do we make these decisions. So if you have an Android phone, iOS is coming soon. Download our app. You'll find it on the Play Store. It's called Basis. What we've done is we actually ask you just a few questions. What are you saving up for? When do you want to get to it? And how much does it cost today? So you don't have to worry about what that inflation number is going to be that we talked about in the travel example. Once you input that, you tell us a little bit about your risk profile, because that also matters in terms of how aggressively you want to pursue this, or you want to be a little conservative, etc. And we'll actually run through a lot of numbers in the back end, and we suggest the best funds to start investing in order to maximize your chances of hitting that goal. So try it out, take a look. If you're not a KYC'd investor, we'll take care of that too. You can do it all on our app. So if you haven't already, do it. It'll be a fun activity for the weekend, and we'd love feedback, questions, how to make it better, etc. What we want is to kind of create just that seamless experience to help every one of you just get to those financial goals and plan out your money, over the next several months and years.
Yeah, and I think don't hold your money in your savings bank accounts, in your FDs, in recurring deposits, like we've said entirely in this conversation. They don't work very well for you.
They make you poorer.
Yeah, they make you poorer. They just don't even match up to inflation. Move this money around, move it to a liquid fund. It works really well. I get excited by even that $1,000 or $1,200 I earn as interest, because I'm like, hey, technically I got that movie ticket for free, because otherwise this money was just going to lie in my savings bank account. So use your money well and make it work harder than you.
Awesome. So next week, just as a quick preview, we are going to build on. So if you all remember our chat on retirement, we did leave it off on, this is how you calculate what you need, but how the hell do we get there? So we'll be covering that, a much longer term goal than your travel or your emergency and all the stuff we were talking today. So slightly different change in mindset, but that's what we'll be talking about next week. And as always, send in questions, start discussion, talk money with each other. Cool. Thank you, and have a good weekend.